Okay. Thank you all for joining this webinar on the case for hope in the age of AI. So this is a fifth era webinar, although it will be slightly different from those that you guys may have joined with us in past. Of course, I am a partner with Fifth Era. I help lead our AI investments and strategy, but this presentation is not kind of the classic ones we do on our thesis or state of the industry. It's actually adjacent to that based on some advisory and other work I've done over the years. So the opinions that I'm going to share here are mine personally and not necessarily those of the firm. And I will, of course, state nothing in here is investment advice. But I think it should be a really interesting topic to dive into because AI is a ubiquitous term at the moment. And actually, a lot of the dialogue can be very fear-based, or there's a lot of valid risks and concerns and uncertainty with the moment we're in. And as a savvy individual, whether you are an investor or a builder or operator, whatever your interaction with AI has been, I think it's helpful to actually really see the full picture and what some of the headlines tend to miss. So why are we talking about the case for hope? So these words I selected very intentionally, case in the sense that I always take a very evidence and fact-based approach to this topic. I think that there are a lot of very real and valid risks, and I'm lucid on those, and we're not going to ignore any of them in this discussion. However, the word hope, meaning the grounds for believing that something good may happen. That's the definition that I like to use. So this is not optimism or positivity or enthusiasm. It is just the belief that something good may happen. And actually, that's critical when we're in a moment like this because our collective focus is very powerful. So where our focus grows, our energy tends to flow. And I see one of the big risks is that we're all kind of swept up in the doomsday messaging to an unproductive extent. Okay, so the summary of this talk is going to be three things. One, AI has arrived as the great disruptor. So we're going to talk a lot about how this is a very powerful new tool. It's come of age. We're in this massive inflection point where it will rewrite every industry, the way we work, live, operate, pretty much everything we do on the planet. But it may actually restore us to our humanity. That may sound like a lofty claim or conviction. We'll see how you feel by the end of this talk. It's a strong conviction of mine, certainly, and we'll get into why. And then also that we have the power to shape that trajectory. So as I mentioned, as investors, builders, advisors, the decisions that we make right now will shape the trajectory we take with this technology. And so it's so important in this window that we have to be very conscious and intentional. And that's especially true of capital allocation for those listening to this who are investors, because what we fund determines what gets built and whether or not that's towards a more flourishing human future or not. Okay, briefly, who am I and why am I talking about this? So I say I'm a technologist on the one hand, but also humanist. So yes, I've spent my career over the past decade in the world of tech, in AI, back when it was more machine learning and big data topics, working with corporates, FTSE hundreds, as an advisor to AI scale-ups, and then of course as an investor, as a partner with Fifth Era, leading our AI strategy. So I have been at the forefront of this technology for some time, and as a result, I'm very lucid about, as I mentioned, the risks and what's being built, but also a humanist. I am incredibly passionate, obsessed by and committed to human well-being, consciousness, ancient wisdom traditions, which we'll actually touch on some of that in this talk. And have been a student of these topics throughout my whole life. And now I'm sort of playing a bridge between this increasingly. So that's the lens that I bring. What is the structure for today? So we're going to talk about 5 common perceptions of AI. And for each one of those, we're going to look at the reality today and thus the risks that are present before we zoom out to the bigger picture opportunity. Before we get into that though, well, and actually, so right now I would like to say, if you guys can use the Q&A, send me your biggest concern or risk around AI. Just do that now while I give a little preface on what is AI, just for those who aren't necessarily privy to the technology. So what is AI? Just 3 slides, and then we'll get into the bulk of the structure that I just mentioned. So many of the people listening are very well versed already. Increasingly, our kind of collective understanding is growing as we become more familiar with this technology. But we immediately kind of think of ChatGPT or Claude, name your favorite LLM of the moment. We think of autonomous AI agents. We think about process automation. Maybe you work for a corporate or an enterprise that's currently adopting. And so that's what we think of in the popular imagination at the moment. Actually, AI is just the simulation of human intelligence in machines that are programmed to think and learn like humans. And this technology has been around for a long time. So, and it's we interface with it day to day in ways that we're not even necessarily always cognizant of. So when Spotify suggests a playlist, for example, or when Netflix is suggesting films for you after you finish watching another one, all of that, or even Google Maps, right? All of that is AI without even fully knowing that we're using it. And I could talk in detail about, this is kind of our picture of the AI stack. We do have I have a whole webinar that we gave on our AI thesis, which goes into this in detail. But basically, if you look at this model layer here on the left-hand side, you see the foundation models. Those are the big kind of players that I mentioned, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera, that many people are very familiar with. But it's not the full picture. The point is that there's a much broader ecosystem here. Even within the model layer, there's all these customization and fine-tuning solutions to make those LLMs interoperable with the app layer that sits on top of it. You have APIs and hubs that developers use to access those foundation models, play around with one or a mix of them. Of course, the app layer on the top, which is booming at the moment. You have agentic AI on the one hand, which is sort of the spectrum of autonomy from basic chatbots all the way through to fully fledged agents that can, in theory, in future, although we're not quite there yet, replace what a human could do. Enterprise AI, which is a big boom in the market, and creative and individual tools. And then finally, the infrastructure layer at the bottom, which is sort of the picks and shovels, data centers, chips, about NVIDIA, et cetera. So the point here is that it's a large ecosystem. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to our thesis webinar. But that is to say, it's both established and young. So of course, we've reached this inflection point since GPT 3.5 came out at the end of 2022, where it's becoming this ubiquitous term, but actually it's 50 years old. So as old as the internet in many senses, and just has evolved slowly over time from early neural networks to first commercial use cases in the early 2000s with Siri and Alexa and others. And now it's really come of age because advanced computing has gotten to the stage where it can make good on its rhetoric. So that's just a little preface of what is this technology. And now if I come to what are your key fears and concerns, usually when I do this talk in front of groups, I can just ask. But so someone mentioned job losses, impact on the environment of data centers, impact on our intelligence. Yes, yes, yes. So the reason I ask this now is just to show these are the 5 common perceptions that I have honed in on for the purposes of this talk and the ones that we're going to go through together. But they are the common ones, right? Jobs, number 1. And I always start there because it's very front of mind. Then disruption to specific industries. And you can pick any industry you want. We're going to cover a few, can't cover them all. AI is making us less intelligent, which was mentioned. So yeah, what is the effect on our cognition when we've developed a tool that can do cognitive tasks better, faster, more effectively than we can? A lot of concerns around safety and security, data privacy, these sorts of considerations. And then finally, so we're going kind of from more micro to more macro, the concern that AI will overpower us. And there I use that term very specifically to cover a whole host of macro risks that we will also get into. So these are kind of the most common perceptions about AI. And there's a lot of related risks within each of those. Don't try to read them all now. Somehow we're going to cover it in the next 50 minutes. What I will say is that each one of these things could be its own 3-hour talk. I mean, there's entire conferences on any given one of these. So I'm going to do the best whistle-stop tour that I possibly can. But my goal is really just to provide a bird's eye view and big picture, and also to bring nuance back into some of these areas where the majority of what we hear is fear and causes for concern. Okay, perception, reality, opportunity is the structure as mentioned. So let's get started with, is AI taking jobs? number one, to which I would say, yes, AI is absolutely going to impact the job market. And we see that in a lot of the statistics. So 92 million jobs are expected to be lost by 2030. That's a statistic from the World Economic Forum's Future of Work report. 40% of global employment is exposed to AI. It's from the IMF. And in that same report, they said 67% of jobs in US and EU are exposed. So that's advanced economies specifically. And that 67% of the US workforce could be replaced in the next decade. These are some of the statistics. By the way, they're getting updated all the time. So these are probably already, need a refresh. But it will be a massive impact. However, it's an evolution, not a collapse. So in that same report that gets cited a lot, the World Economic Forum report that said 92 million jobs lost, it also cites 170 million jobs created in the same time frame, representing a net gain of 78 million. Why is that? We're going to have new jobs, completely new industries arising, which I'm going to talk about in a second. 40% of global employment is exposed to AI. 50%, though, is expected to be positively impacted rather than negatively. That is augmentation and the reduction of kind of grunt work, manual labor, and thus resulting in net positive impact. A lot of work is exposed, but Goldman Sachs suggests that the peak unemployment effect is going to be 0.5 points. What that basically translates to is a very slow, gradual change. For context, I think the economic recession of 2008 and 2009 was around 5 points, and COVID was 11 because there was that big furlough overnight. So the point is this will be relatively gradual because we tend to underestimate inertia, the fact that this takes time, especially in large corporate contexts. And finally, workforce replaced, but we'll still see this growth of hybrid human AI roles. And also I want to make one other point here, which is in that parentheses where you see about advanced economies. A lot of the fear mongering and messaging is coming from individuals or, from those from the West, really, I want to say largely, which makes sense. Also, given that our stewardship of this technology is kind of iffy and trust is very low, given prior tech cycles we've lived through. But I would just say that, in this talk, we talk a lot about AI as a great democratizer and a real opportunity and potential for other parts of the world and for kind of individuals and collectives in many other ways. So I just wanted to plant that seed there. Okay. What are the really valid risks of the job transition? Because we cannot negate that the next couple of years, there's a huge amount we're going to be in this transition period. AI literacy and reskilling is a huge one. There will be a widening divide if we don't ensure that AI knowledge and training is equal and done well. Uneven job displacement, this is a big one. The disruption will be concentrated in specific job types and specific sectors and industries. We already talked about advanced versus developing economies, for example. And then third, and probably one of the largest, is the unequal benefits. Who stands to gain from AI? Who is reaping the benefits of this new innovation? And how do we address that? So for each of these risks, what I like to point out is how they're being addressed. I don't have time to go through every bullet here, but what I've tried to lift up is some of the great initiatives and teams who are at work trying to address some of these risks. And so if I focus just for each of these, I'll focus on a couple in particular, maybe to highlight. So unequal benefits. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about UBI, which is universal basic income. And what I will say about that is, of course, at scale, there's a question of how that would get funded. But the trials that have been done have across the board been incredibly powerful. And they find that well-being improves. So what this is basically giving people a basic monthly stipend and regular cash payments to help them adapt to economic shifts. And so people have better mental health, more security. The number one concern is that if we implement UBI, people won't work. But actually what they found in all these pilots is that work incentives did not collapse whatsoever. In fact, at least in the California trial, the recipients of UBI were 2 times more likely to move from part to full-time work because they had less of that survival stress and they were able to take time to really find something proper for themselves. They could get themselves to interviews, their transportation was taken care of, childcare was covered and things like this. So they took that bigger risk. And so this is sort of a really hopeful space that is developing. But I want to zoom out now. And this is that kind of zoom out to the potential, to the possibility here, which is to say human work has always evolved. It's shifted over time. It's going to shift again. Here we look at the eras of human life on Earth, the 4 to date. And as you know, we're called fifth era, which is all about underpinning this next era of human life that we're stepping into. We used to be hunter-gatherers. There, our work was defined as subsistence activities. We spent almost half our week in, 2.5 days a week on subsistence. As agrarians, 90% of us, at least in the US, were farmers. As industrialists, we had the rise of mass manufacturing and factory work. That's where you get the 9 to 5 clock in, clock out, which we've now co-opted, but into the information age where many of us are sit like this on screens, and we're kind of, and actually this modern wrapper and version of work where we are largely sedentary. Some of us sit at cubicles and on desks and in skyscrapers, and we're disconnected from nature and from our physical bodies, is the most dystopian one yet. And it's modern. So if we look at which jobs is AI really taking, in the short term, it's primarily digital knowledge work and automation of that work. And it's routine physical or manual tasks. And in both of those, in the former, as I mentioned, we have all this disconnection. And in the latter, we're not necessarily, those don't necessarily use our creativity or innovation, our imagination, these innate human traits. And when I do this in front of audiences, I say like, okay, raise your hand if as a kid, either of these was your dream career. And usually no one raises their hand, but actually I was humbled in Manila the other day because 2 people raised their hand and I was like, okay. But the point is most people did not. So if AI is disrupted to those, is that really something that we're going to miss? That's one point. The next is then what's left for us. Sometimes people ask, what are the areas that are least likely to be disrupted by AI when it comes to work? And there's so many takes on that. This is kind of my amalgamation or simplification of that, which is what remains uniquely human. One, embodied work. So anything that requires a human physical body, our presence and our sensing. So, things we mentioned like farming or carpentry, chefs who are creating food, and people who work with the soma, with the physical body. Relational work is another. So anything that requires the exchange of 2 individuals, 2, souls, nurses and care work, therapists, anything bringing people together in events and experiences, etc., where there's an energetic exchange between 2 humans that cannot be replaced by a synthetic tool. And then meaning-making work. So where you need a human decision-making layer because there's values or ethics required. That's what remains uniquely human in a nutshell, in my view. And then we have the new industries. So I say like at the dawn of the internet, right, we couldn't have fathomed social media or e-commerce or many of these industries that then arose as a result of the technology. We can't fathom what those will be here, but we can hypothesize. And for me, some of these are orchestration. So any human AI hybrid roles or oversight required to manage and direct, a workforce of now 20 agents doing whatever they're doing. Anything to do with the human AI interface, where and how we work with this technology, including for emotional and empathetic use cases of AI, which we're going to talk about more in a minute. Trust economy is going to be absolutely huge, an entire industry around identity, verification of truth, content provenance, and then embodied tech. So we already see, AI in the real world, including robotics, but things like Waymos and now buses, smart infrastructure, smart things. But really, when we talk about the work point, as I mentioned, if you believe that this era of human life on Earth, our definition of work has been one of the most dystopian yet, then AI holds the potential to enhance human dignity by freeing up our time for care, creativity, civic engagement, et cetera. And that term human dignity just feels so true because so much of the work we do today doesn't have dignity and aren't working for us. So there's an opportunity to really shift that. Okay, I need to go a little faster. Common perception number 2. Disruption of AI to entire industries. And there's so many industries we could focus on here. I'm going to try to do education, creative arts, and the environment. That's 3 that I'm going to try to get through in this point. So I'm going to go really quickly. AI in education, lots of concern here. Students are using it more, but are they using it to cheat? Is there plagiarism, other misuse? Again, a lot of concern. So what's actually happening? The current impact is, if we look at the stats, 86% of students are already using AI. There's been very rapid adoption, little oversight as of yet. There's a subset of teachers who feel this is negative. Students are skipping office hours, et cetera. So they're not doing school the way that they used to do school, and that is negative. Again, let's look at the flip side. The market's growing very rapidly, and that means that oversight and strategy on how to embed this into academia is going to improve and continue to improve. We're still early on. There are a subset of teachers who feel it's negative, and those can tend to be a louder minority, but actually the majority of them think that this is an essential tool for student success and are thinking about how to embed it into their classrooms. And when you look at other studies, you find that these tools can support learning efficiency, and that if we blend human and AI teaching, test scores and other metrics improve. So of course, relying solely on AI is always going to be negative, but a blended approach can actually be beneficial. And now, if I zoom out again though, we have to ask, this technology is disruptive, but disruptive to what? And is that always a bad thing? Or has academia been the same centuries-old model for a long time, and possibly one that's ripe for disruption? If you think about how it's designed, it's primarily passive learning by listening. We listen to what a teacher's saying to us, we memorize that information, and then we recite it back to get an A on a test, right? There's no critical thinking really involved in that process. It's also sedentary. We're sitting, we have the sage on a stage, and it's actually not massively rooted in the science and psychology of how we learn. None of these issues are new, by the way. They predate AI, but AI is now here as this disruptor, forcing us to look at the system and if it's fit for purpose. So in education, I actually see the potential for a new era of AI academia, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It could force us to shift towards project-based learning. So classrooms become about hands-on activities and collaboration, not just this cerebral exercise. Forces there to be more debate and dynamism. So yes, you can now get all that knowledge and information from an AI tutor in the personalized way you like to learn, et cetera. You get to the classroom and you have to get curious then about, how does my opinion or my interpretation differ from you, fellow student, and from you, fellow student? And we can discuss those unique viewpoints and have a real dialogue. And thirdly, it rewards not just having the knowledge, which anyway is not going to come at a premium in the future because we have this tool with now knowledge at our fingertips, but how do we apply it? So what do we build with it? What do we do with it? What do we bring into the world as a result of it? And by the way, there's already schools adopting this model with wonderful results. The other possibility of AI that I feel like gets missed in this is that it has the possibility to educate anyone, anywhere, in real time, personalized at virtually no cost. And there's a huge, Coursera, Brainly, these companies mentioned here, they are providing education to people around the world who didn't previously have it or couldn't access it. And this is one of humanity's greatest problems, that we have the ability now to equalize with this technology. And I'm always surprised no one seems to be talking about that. Okay. I know I'm going very quickly, but creative industries. Again, a space where there's a lot of concern. AI generated content, photos, videos, and art in general, music. What does this do to creators and to our creative instinct as a species? So what are we seeing? Again, yes, AI is absolutely causing massive disruption to this space. 26% of creative tasks in arts, design, entertainment, media could be automated by AI. That's from McKinsey & Co. The majority of creatives agree that AI will impact their jobs in some way. And then there's some stats on how many jobs that is, I guess, in entertainment, specifically in the US. And the fear, this is creators' fears, is that my role as a creator is no longer about creating. It's about editing AI outputs. And that just doesn't cut it for me, the creator. And I completely understand that. But also there's a massive opportunity here. So the industry, the gross value add that's anticipated from Crea Tech, the fusion of creativity and technology, is 18 billion. That's from the UK Creative Industries Council. There are creatives who strongly believe that AI threatens their job security, but it's a small number. Actually, the majority are adopting this and already thinking about how to incorporate it into their work. New jobs are already being created at the intersection of these technologies. And we're seeing an increase in freelance roles from the Freelancer Fast 50 Global Jobs Index. This was in last year, but clients were starting to seek really authentic, human, emotionally resonant content, and realizing that at least as of now, where we are with AI, they weren't getting that. But if we zoom out, innovation has transformed the creative spaces forever. And we see that with photography, right? This was initially seen as a threat to painters and portrait artists. Why would you hire a painter when you could take a photograph? But it evolved instead into its own art form. And then painting shifted as a result to styles, to myriad other styles that were less bound by realism because you had the photograph to capture reality. Radio, same thing. Live musicians were very fearful they would lose income, but instead they could reach entirely new audiences. And we had new industries born as a result, right? Record labels, broadcast media, all these sorts of things. CGI, same thing. Filmmakers thought we would lose craftsmanship of film. Instead, it expanded, created entirely new genres in film. And digital streaming, same thing. So the point is, we've always had these fears that innovation would destroy creativity. But not only did creativity persist, it actually, new possibilities arose that we couldn't see always at the outset. And creativity became, like, true human authentic art became more valued when that authenticity was more nuanced or scarce. Okay. And I see, again, 3 reasons to be hopeful. So new era of AI activity. It can get a little crazy with the AIs there, but why? 3 reasons. For the number 1, creation minus gatekeeping. What do I mean by that? For the first time, the barrier to entry for being able to create is lowering. So you don't need to be a trained musician, for example, to make music. You can use Suno AI, which is something I use, or you don't need to be a designer to create visuals, right? You can go on ChatGPT and make some art. And I know that that's very disruptive, and especially to creators, it's deeply, like, they've spent their whole lives training in these crafts. But I would also say, is it a bad thing that more people can be invited into creative expression on the one hand? Second, expanded imagination. I mean, it really, if you guys have looked at AI art, I find it quite mind-blowing. And the fact that creatives can even use it to explore creative directions in just minutes. Like before, to prototype all these different aesthetic potentials or ideas would have taken them weeks. Now you can iterate on that in just minutes, and helps you hone actually the direction that you want to take. Or if you're designing for a brief for a client, helps you get to a solution much, much more quickly as well. And then 3, and actually this is one I'm the most passionate about, premium on authenticity. When anything can be generated and we're like inundated with AI generated content, actually what stands out the most is what could not have been generated. And work that feels incredibly authentic and deeply personal has a resonance that it's just undeniable. We're already seeing this in music, and a real shift in the music industry, which I'm very musical as a side point. But, whether you look at the albums winning album of the year, Rosalia, Bad Bunny, okay, if you're not musical, none of this will make sense. But the point is, we're seeing the rise of hyper local albums with sounds, like even Ray's new album, which is this journey through R&B, and Hans Zimmer's on it. And we have orchestras, like the return of sounds that can only be created by a human. And I think that that's an incredibly hopeful thing, because for so long, artists have anyway been forced to create sounds, content, art that isn't really deeply theirs. It's just what they had to create for mass consumption. And now they'll be returned to that. Okay. I need to, again, go faster. I could talk about these things forever. The point is, this is a quote by me: innate human traits are not an endangered species at risk of extinction by AI. I just think we're doing such a disservice to human creativity in the case of creative arts, curiosity and learning in the case of education, if we are boiling it down to saying that a tool is going to disrupt our ability to be able to do these things. We're a very resilient species. Okay, I need some water. Hold on. Which is perfect, because look, thirsty AI, right? When I got really thirsty. Okay, AI in the environment. lots of concern about data centers, the current energetic demand and footprint of AI. So let's get into that. I care deeply about this topic. I actually did my undergraduate kind of focus on environmental science, and so I have a lot to say. First, I'm actually skipping right to the reasons to be hopeful just in the interest of time. First point, everyone wants the same thing. So for the most part, AI becoming more energy efficient is in everyone's best interest. Model developers, app builders, infrastructure layer, across the board. In AI, compute is money. So the whole stack benefits if they can squeeze more compute, more useful work out of every watt. It is a universal competitive advantage. And so that means that we won't see the lobbying against kind of sustainability in this space, or at least we shouldn't in the way that we've seen with traditional sustainability efforts across industries. The other point I want to make is early technology is notoriously inefficient. If anyone's familiar with this image, it's of one of the first computers in 1945 called ENIAC. I won't get into the stats of it, but it drew a huge amount of power to do basically nothing. It was incredibly inefficient. If you compare it to modern hardware, you actually will see an efficiency gain of 2.5 trillion over 80 years. So basically, this computer, ENIAC, needed enough power for a village to run a machine that is slower than today's pocket calculator. So my point is, when we worry about the energy footprint of AI, we are making extrapolations based on where the technology is today, forgetting that we're still in the early stages, even though, yes, it's 50 years old, but in this inflection point we're in, and it takes time for compute to get more efficient, but it will, again, because everybody wants that. On the flip side, or not on the flip side, but on the other hand in hand with the term AI is the word efficiency. And yes, this was like a word cloud I generated from AI, and that's why it looks like a mess. But AI will make virtually everything we do on the planet more efficient. And that means less energy intensive. So, there are pockets of our energy systems on the planet that are wildly inefficient. And I think there's a stat from the IEA which says if AI is widely adopted by 2035, it could reduce 3 or 4 times more CO2 than it's projected to emit from data centers alone. And that's just a conservative estimate. So if it makes good on even a fraction of this promise, it would be one of the most energy saving technologies we've ever invented as a species. And aside from that, there are so many incredible things that AI allows us to do as an ally to addressing the climate crisis. In fact, my conviction is that there is really no way we get ourselves out of the current climate predicament without taking a bold bet on cutting edge technology like AI. And I could talk about AI coupled with Earth observation, what we're able to do when you pair it with satellite data and to spot and monitor issues in real time. We can map icebergs 10,000 times faster than humans can, digital twins that are being created on city levels, on global levels, smart systems and material. There's so much here, and it's just the start. And one thing I also wanted to highlight, I was just a judge for a hackathon in the Philippines where we were working with local entrepreneurs to come up, how can we apply our best modern technology and AI to solve their very real world problems? And these were some of the bullets of what the teams came up with and what they were working on. Like flood management is a massive thing in the Philippines, humanitarian drones, because it's an archipelago. So how do you get medicine and food delivery to remote islands when they need it? Regenerative and sustainable farming. I mean, this is a huge frontier, and there's so many incredible people with their heart really in the right place using this tool for good. So here are some quotes, that AI could be more of a help than a hindrance in achieving climate goals, and then it's being used in all sorts of ways to facilitate climate action. I really believe that this particular frontier is incredibly promising. Okay, my goodness. AI makes us less intelligent. This actually, I put it right in the middle. This is my absolute favorite segment. So I'm going to take time with it. And then if we have to skip a little bit of this safety, security, or go quickly through it, that's fine with me. So is AI making us less intelligent? In some ways, yes, there's a lot of valid risks around this. So One, automation bias. So this is the concern of kind of treating what AI tells you as if it's true without verifying it. So we lose our internal sense check. Shallow engagement, meaning we are spending less time really wrestling with the nuance of a topic because we're just, the information's right there in front of us. Cognitive offloading. So this risk that we hand over all that good problem solving that we do, we hand it over to a tool that can do it better and faster. And the loss of productive struggle. This one, it's interesting. People are like, what's loss of productive struggle? It's basically the concept that not knowing things is actually really good for humans. Having to struggle with it and work through it and really deeply engage with the topic is what leads to some of our greatest breakthroughs. So for all of these risks, rather than showing you a bullet of who's working on them, I think a lot of the mitigation for these is purely in how we use the technology and the questions that we're asking ourselves as we use it. Like, am I fact checking the outputs or am I just immediately accepting it? Am I, am I in the driver's seat when I'm using this technology? Am I using it as a crutch or as a real thought partner? But I want to just say, a lot of those risks, we had similar intelligence fears with former technologies, especially the cognitive offloading point. We thought that of the printing press. We thought it would reduce our memory and our intellectual rigor because now we were writing things down instead of memorizing them. We thought it with the calculator that we'd lose basic arithmetic skills. Instead, actually freed us up just to be able to do much more complex mathematical problem solving. GPS, we thought we'd lose our spatial abilities. We wouldn't have the memory for routes and landmarks, right? And actually, there was benefits to that too. And then the internet, people thought having information at our fingertips would make us less capable of all the same concerns I just showed. Was it true? Not necessarily, generally speaking, no, we've those technological advances have led to more, suggesting that we're freeing up our human cognition for more innovation, not less. And as a species, we've continued to get more intelligent over time. If this is the IQ from 1909 to 2013 across the world. But now I want to zoom out again. And this is my favorite part. So when I'm with groups, I say like, okay, what does intelligence look like? So if you're in your room or wherever you're listening from now, I say to people like, show me what you think intelligence looks like. And then they always kind of go like this, or they're like, or they do like David's the thinker, right? And I'm like, aha, very good. Yes. That, whenever we talk about intelligence, we either point to the mind or we're thinking, right? It's all about cognition. And why am I making this point? Because, oh my God, this slide always cracks me up. We have long worshipped at the altar of the mind. But what do I mean by this? In this, again, modern era of human life on Earth, we are incredibly heavily indexed on cognition as intelligence. And it makes sense. Our superior intellect as a species has been our evolutionary competitive advantage. So of course we've been hyper developed on it. I mean, it's everything, all this amazing technology and innovation is a result of our superior cognition. But how far have we swung? And is that a good thing? Because what is human intelligence really? And I would say human intelligence, and this is something we've forgotten, is so far beyond just what the brain, that one organ, can do. There are intelligences we have waylaid and lost over time that we now have the ability to reconnect with because they remain uniquely human in a future where we offload cognition. Like what? Things like our ecological intelligence, our knowing of the living world, our indigenous, we used to have indigenous knowledge and deep connection with the land and ocean. We navigated by it. We take that for granted now as sort of this thing of the past. Again, I was just in the Philippines where they almost, this attunement was never so lost. That's why you see pictures here actually used of rice terraces that were built over 2,000 years ago, like their rice terrace technology, and mangroves, which are this natural climate solution. Our somatic intelligence, which is knowing through the body. So our embodied awareness, the wisdom of the physical body, the nervous system, and kind of the innate knowing of that very complex, wise system that we've gotten out of touch with. And our communal and collective intelligence, our knowing together or knowing how to be in community And we would do, we had these rituals and rites of passage. We had storytelling traditions. We shared, we grieved together. We celebrated together. There was all this wisdom and cooperation that we've again moved quite far away from in our more individualistic way of living on Earth. And so the point is, when we offload our cognitive intelligence, it actually forces us to ask this kind of existential question, like, what is human intelligence? And if it doesn't only reside in the brain, what are those uniquely human intelligences that we could potentially now reconnect with? Furthermore, there's actually proof that AI enhances other human traits beyond intelligence. So things like empathy, so our empathy of peers, our trust with them, these kind of human and connective traits, our openness. And there's a lot of, well, I'll show it on the next slide, examples of AI being used to reduce bias, to provide counter stereotypical examples. If we train it to do that for us, to challenge our assumptions, we can train this tool to do all of those things for us, get us out of echo chambers rather than deeper into one. It's just all about how it's designed. Improving our self-awareness. So a lot of people using AI for self-inquiry, for their own personal development work, et cetera, emotional regulation. So we have this tool that mirrors us and could potentially put us more depthfully in touch with some of these other innate human traits. I get really excited about this space. I don't think I'm going to talk about them in detail right now, but there are incredible teams building at this intersection. And with my humanist hat on, I get really excited about these because, I'll just give Verti as an example. These are virtual simulations through video and VR where users can practice soft skills. So actually practicing empathy, communication, leadership in a kind of realistic simulated environment. It's being used by the NHS, Cedars-Sinai, Amazon, huge number of corporates adopting this, and others, like things. EarKick is embedded into wearables, so it can track your heart rate and your, how your body is feeling in real time and intervene accordingly, or take next steps with you or work. It's just so fascinating. So my point here, this is a bubble map that was put together by someone called Abi Owamosu. When ChatGPT 5 came out, there was this kind of big uproar because people felt like, this tool isn't having the same touch or feel that I'm used to. And so she did this social listening project and mapped this bubble map, which is 100 distinct emotional use cases for AI. And this for me is such a huge light bulb. There's things in here like best friend, daily companion, study friend, suicide support, shadow work, health coach, ADHD brain, ancestor link. And all of this is you would never hear this in most AI conferences in Silicon Valley, for example. Why? Because everyone right now is focused on using this technology to build efficiency and productivity tools. When we have designed something that is making people feel seen and heard and validated in a way that cannot be ignored. This is the blueprint for hundreds of AI products that don't exist yet, but that meet real human needs, and they're right for the building. And when we talk about new industries that will arise, my conviction is that it will be in this space. And another hopeful point here is that to build for these, it's, technical engineers, that's great, but the best people to build for these needs are the people who understand them, which is psychologists, right brainers, therapists, creatives, neurodivergent people, caregivers, the people who understand those human needs and can actually solve for them. So I love this quote to end this section, which is from Ray Kurzweil, who's the director of engineering at Google, who said, AI is going to be beautiful and will expand our consciousness in ways we can barely imagine, like a person who is deaf hearing the most exquisite symphony for the first time. And it's just such a deeply hopeful quote. It's expressing this experience of awe and wonder and a return to human senses that have been waylaid for decades in this modern era of human life on Earth, and the possibility to reawaken what has been dormant within us. So I love that section. And actually, before I move on from it, I want to say one more thing, which is about the democratization of care. It's related to the bubble map on the other page, right? Care, whether it's a therapist or a coach, has traditionally been limited in terms of access to those who could afford it or had the time and the privilege to be able to look for that support. People are poo-pooing AI, like, oh, what? It's going to be your best friend and your therapist, and you're going to fall in love with it, and you can be dismissive all you want, but I would ask the question, what does it do to us as a species when that level of care, 24/7, real time, personalized, and good enough? It's not perfect yet. I admit it's not perfect yet. But what does it do to us as a species when everyone on the planet, virtually, has access to that sort of support for free? I just asked the question. And I think we're way too quick to dismiss the power of that sort of potential. Okay. As a result, I'm not going to take as much time on safety and security. But is AI unsafe and insecure right now? Yes, absolutely true. There are a lot of valid concerns about privacy, safety, use of data. I made this iceberg of like top tip of the iceberg through to the kind of deeper risks, which we can't cover all of it. But I would just say, I wouldn't share, just like with the internet, I would be very mindful of what you share using any AI enabled platform at the moment. But let's look, I guess, very briefly at these top four. Do I have time really to do this justice? Data privacy, bias. Well, I'm going to leave it up for a minute. Maybe I just call it a certain point. I mean, I really like to talk about the bias and context and fairness. So this is the risk that AI will amplify societal prejudice because it's trained on skewed data. It's a super important one, right? Because it relates, whatever data we're inputting into these models that they're trained on will be reflected in what it's telling us. And so if we don't have that context, we'll make decisions without it. And that's very unsafe for many reasons. What I will say is that the majority, well, the way in which this is, there's many kind of AI ethics recommendations and principles now trying to address this. But the other thing is that right now, the big LLMs that we're primarily dealing with are trained mostly on publicly available data, not entirely, but mostly. And that's really only like, say, 10% of the data available on the planet. The other 90% is private. It's behind paywalls, it's in private databases, or it's sitting in corporate silos, right? It's untapped. And so there's this real gold rush right now where data is the new land grab in a way, and whoever has control of those really rich data sets will be able to build the most powerful models. And so it's becoming really about ownership of the data. The catch is, even when you do uncover some of that other 90%, that data is still biased, right? Like if you think about scientific studies, or if anyone's read Carolyn Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, it's all about how a lot of trials and tests are built around men as the default. So then, the context around women would still be lost in that. Anyway, the point is, there's this emerging frontier of tools that are trying to build in human context back in, so that, either these solutions are trained on our personal data, which is secured in some private data wallet or blockchain encrypted or something like this, so that you're not giving your information to a third party, so that the agent, in a future where we have agentic decision-making happening for us, they'll be making decisions based on the full messy human context. And I think that that's a really interesting frontier as well. Okay. I then make the point, safety tends to lag behind innovations. We've seen this with cars, air travel, nuclear power was all very unsafe originally. Safety tends to catch up later. Same was true of the internet. Early on, it was all kind of sexually explicit content, dark web, spam, phishing emails, et cetera. And there's real moral panic about the internet in the early 2000s, but things did improve over time. We got better with filters and safety and regulation. Now we pretty much use it every day. So the point is, give it time, be very wary about how you're engaging with this technology still. Okay, I'm going to skip the rest of that section and go to the final one. Okay. I have 7 minutes, but then I'll stay later to answer questions if people have them. Okay, AI will overpower us. So, is this the end of humanity as we know it? Sort of, for all the reasons we discussed. But I use the term overpower here very specifically because although our mind immediately jumps to cyborgs and rebel AI agents and all these sort of things, overpower to me also entails other macro risks that arise when we build technology that gets out of our hands. And for me, these are some of the most important and prescient and honestly, like the biggest realist risks right now, which are not just runaway AI, which is sort of the alignment problem. What happens if AI develops values of its own that aren't in line with human values? But actually, these bottom three, which are especially prescient right now, the use of AI in warfare and weaponry to scale, the use of lethal autonomous weapons. I think people have now heard of like Project Lavender and these other things, right? Or use of AI in control and surveillance. So controlled by authoritarian regimes who use it to restrict personal freedoms and suppress human rights. And economic institutional capture. So kind of the monopolization point by in the hands of a few actors who are really focused on, say, commercial gain or some other point, shaping it to their advantage. These are such real risks. I cannot overstate it enough. You know, there's no, I'm going to provide perspective on them, but there's, to me, these are the biggest risks with AI right now. And again, in the interest of time, instead of talking about the what here in terms of what's being done, I want to talk a little bit about how this is being addressed, because there is something promising in it, right? And again, if hope is a discipline, then let's find the discipline of hope, even in this critical kind of situation. One, it's global, right? It's in a way, we've created this existential other with AI, and that makes us humans the self that needs protecting. All across human history, we've created other and self and other. And now we have this AI as other, which creates this kind of unprecedented cooperation across the globe, but also across functions. Like you see policymakers and, governance, policymakers coming together with social scientists, coming together with humanists, like all trying to address some of these topics. The other point is coordination. So when innovations become this powerful, not just AI, it often forces that type of coordination on that scale. So we saw it with nuclear weapons, biotech. Now we're seeing it with AI, right? So there is this forced coordination, again, on global and cross-functional scale, like I mentioned. The other thing is, yes, AI has the potential to really enable bad actors, but it also improves our ability to monitor and observe those same systems. So at the same time that it's improving visibility, it empowers us to know and see what's happening, and therefore makes it harder for any given individual actor to act invisibly. That's another hopeful point. And then the other is, and I've talked a lot about how AI is this great democratizer in a way, and it has the potential to put power into more hands. So yes, there's the governments and nation states on the one hand using it, but also it empowers individuals and collectives who will have more leverage in future. So the question there is really just going to be which one grows faster, and how quickly can we support the latter and individuals and collectives or initiatives for good to get up to speed and be able to kind of monitor or check and balance. And yeah, I'll just leave that there for now. So the other thing, all right, last kind of bit. What I always say, especially with the runaway AI point, that fear isn't new. So without losing any of the nuance and the complexity and the importance of those risks that we mentioned, I do want to point out that the fear of losing control to our own creations isn't new. We've seen it across time in, books, I, Robot, Matrix, all these, not Brave New World, one of my favorite books, dystopia about social control, Tech as a Tool for Passive Oppression, RUR by Carol Kapik, all these sort of books. And what I will say about that, people have been imagining this potential future for a long time. And our imagination, or to the point of our imagination, I want to look at briefly a series of paintings made by this French artist at the turn of the century. So you can see this is kind of in 1900, 1901, and they were depicting what they thought life would look like in the year 2000. And so they were imagining. And some of their imaginings were very accurate. Like you see here, like an early precursor to the vacuum, early farming machines, like a mobile home illustration, right? So our imagination can be very accurate. Our imagination can also be inaccurate. So others, we had like an orchestra that was completely machine run, back to the creative industry point. We had children hooked up to a machine education. I mean, not entirely wrong in full ways, but we also, like these bottom two, right? They thought that delivering mail and firefighting would be aerial professions. And what's interesting about the bottom left here is like, we have a flying guy delivering mail, but he's delivering physical mail. So they could not have fathomed email, right? At all. Or the firefighters, you can see on this in here, there's a steam train in the bottom left. So they couldn't have fathomed, other forms of transportation. So it just shows the limits of our imagination, even in it. And our imagination can be wild and weird. So some are just totally strange. Like they had this obsession with underwater. By the way, in none of the paintings is there anything about outer space, but there was this obsession with underwater. So the point is, our imagination is amazing, but again, it's not, it can take us in any direction depending on how we corral it. It's not always accurate. So I always say, if our imagination can imagine any outcome, we may as well expect the best while also planning for the worst, which I hope I've been demonstrating is what's happening with these great teams trying to address the very valid risks. Okay, we finished the top 5. I know we're finishing at the hour. I'm going to go over anyway for anyone who can stay. If you have to leave, that's fine. But you might say, I still just don't fully understand AI and therefore I find it scary. To which I would say, that is completely normal. That is your amygdala. We have a function in the brain which is designed to fear the unknown. It's what keeps us safe. It's part of our biology. And so it makes sense that we're afraid, especially because look at the headlines. Like these are just some that I took from snippets of AI headlines, that it's gonna, the danger of AI is here, the scariest AI reality. Are you scared yet? Psychopathic AI, right? Even the Stephen Hawking one, which is really interesting, by the way, because his book, that's the Stephen Hawking book they're referring to there, was actually broadly very positive and optimistic about AI. There was like a 5% or 10% of the book that was, again, very wary and lucid of the risk, but they cherry picked that and used it for a headline. And that's not just AI. The fear-based messaging in the media is predominant everywhere. This was from like BBC News, from when I gave a talk in the UK. And it's so like the terminology used everywhere, just inundating our brain with this fear-based messaging. And it's unfortunate, but the news is designed to get us to click and engage and to share. And it does that, unfortunately, by exploiting our collective psychology to an extent. So that's just what happens. Meanwhile, while AI is getting this treatment in the press, it's busy solving some of the world's biggest problems. And we looked at that throughout this talk, at least on the education front, climate, environment, the others we didn't get to touch on, but it truly can, it's a tool. It's a powerful tool. And just like a hammer is a tool that you can use to either build a house or as a murder weapon, AI is a tool, and how we use it is up to us. But there are incredibly powerful, positive applications of this technology that just aren't getting the attention I believe they deserve. We're early on. We're in this kind of trough of disillusionment. Yes, early usages are not ideal. And yes, there are lots of really valid, very real risks still to address. These are just some of them that I put in this talk. They should not be ignored. And I'd argue that they are not being ignored. There's incredible teams working on these. But let's not lose the forest for the trees on any front. Jobs, it can replace tasks, not humanity, and make space for our definition of work to change again and restore it to something with more dignity. On all these fronts, I'm not going to cover them again, but this is sort of the summary of everything we walked through together. There's real potential here, and there's reasons to be hopeful. So in conclusion, I want to leave you guys with this matrix, which is, at the end of the day, hope is a choice, and we get to choose. And I made this matrix, which shows, there's the positives and the negatives of today. We have positives, negatives, and present and future. So a lot of people will focus and quite naturally on the positives of today that they love, things that they are familiar with, that they enjoy, and they'll feel fear. They'll feel fear that I'm going to lose those. And then they look at the future and they envision the negatives of the future and they again feel fear. And if you're on this axis or if you're feeling this way, that's completely human. That's a human response. It's a status quo. Majority of humans, I would argue, are in this axis. But there are also those who look at the negatives of today. They think about all the issues with the world and these, along these different fronts that we mentioned. And they have ideas for how to solve them, ideas for how they could apply AI, the most powerful technology at our fingertips today, to solve them. And then they think about the future and they think about the positives that could result from addressing some of those problems. And they feel hope. And if you're on that axis, that second axis is an entrepreneur mindset. And it's those smaller subset who look at what's wrong with the world today and come up with ideas for how to solve it. And that's what leads us to innovation and to growth. And, wherever you sit on this axis is fine, but it's worth being very conscientious and intentional about where you sit. Because as I said, as individuals, we really have the ability to shape the trajectory that this technology now takes. And either way, the tech's here to stay. So let's choose wisely. After all, where our focus goes, our energy flows. Our collective focus is very powerful. If we spend all of our time envisioning doomsday scenarios, we are much more likely to create exactly that. Whereas if we even remotely believe in a future where AI unlocks human potential, restores us to more deeply flourishing ways of being human on Earth, unlocks innovative approaches to solve the problems of today, if that future is even a remote possibility in our minds, I suggest we focus on it, because where our focus goes, our energy will flow and we get to choose. Thank you. That's it. If you want to connect with me, please do. I just a few days ago started sharing on social media under the Case for Hope on Instagram, which is the left-hand side, or connect on LinkedIn. I also have a website around this. And of course, you can always reach out to Fifth Era, ir@fifthera.com, to get in touch with us. So thank you. I'm just gonna stop the recording.